ditch.
I'm glad there's no women in this class, so we can talk like that.
I think I was pushing Steve's boundaries yesterday.
With what?
Everything else.
Word.
So now you got the word
We're
glorious.
talking about vegans and stuff. Vegetarian.
Yeah. So I got a get from said connector to said connector, and I'm gonna put a 3-point saddle in there, which looks like this. Okay, you gotta go up and over that. One thing to think about with these is you already know how to bend an offset, right? So if this is an offset and this is an offset, kind of like two back-to-back offsets together, right? So when we get into shrink and stuff like that, just keep that in mind.
Right.
Okay, so I guess what I got to do is I have to know the height of the obstruction, right? Sort of doing light work by the way. So try it. It's not very big. Supposed to try it. Hmm. I'll try it. What I'm saying is, like, if I have a 45-degree bend here and here, and these are going to end up being 22 and a half. Do I have enough room on the pipe to make that bend? I'm going to try it and see if we can make it work. All right. 3-point saddle. I need to have 3 marks on there. I'm going to make 3 different bends. If I was doing this proper, I would measure from here to here, figure out shrink. What happens with shrink is when I take this pipe and then put 3 bends in it, the total length of it ends up shortening a little bit, right? So if I measure from this point to the middle of the triangle, by the time I make that first set of bends, it's going to move that way a little bit. So with EMT, it doesn't matter a whole lot because you can just cut it to whatever length you need. So for this and for your lab, when you're doing your 3-point saddle, you won't need to do any measuring for shrink or anything. I'm just going to put a mark right in the middle of the pipe and then measure out each way to where I need to put the other 2 marks. So mark in the middle of my pipe. Now, how far each way do I need to put the next set of marks? I guess I gotta measure this first. So the height of my obstruction is gonna be, I'm gonna make it a little bit taller to give myself a little bit of wiggle room. It's actually like 2 1/8, but I'm gonna call it 2 1/4. Okay. Triangles are gonna look like this. This is 2 1/4 inches. if I was bending on 30. So here's the thing with these benders, that rim notch, remember I was telling you about? Here we go. Where's my mind? It's 2.5. Oh, here. So the rim notch, which is, you got a star that we use for back-to-back 90. Bring it up here. So star we use for back-to-back 90. This is the rim notch. This will show you where the center of a 45-degree bend is. So for a 3-point saddle with these, we're going to do 45 in the middle and then 22.5 either direction on the outside. Okay, so if this was 45, we need to figure out what the distance between these marks is. So there's 2 ways you can do it. So draw a little bit. You can see a triangle. 45 and 2 1/4 inches. We need to figure out this. So somebody do it the trig way and somebody do it the multiplier way. Tell me what they are. Huh? 2.6. Multiplier or trig? Trig. Well, no. That's, yeah. So a trig would be sine of 45 is 2.25 over the hypotenuse. I got 3.18. 2.25 divided by the sine of 45. Yeah. And that's 3 point what? 1/8. So basically 3 1/4 inches. And then somebody do the multiplier. 3.17. And all that was 2.25 times, what's the multiplier? 1.41. What was that? What's the multiplier? 1.1 times 1.41. Either way you slice it, you're going to get about the same. The bigger your offsets, the bigger your taller your obstructions, the more accurate the trig version is going to be versus the multiplier. But it's always going to work.
Buckley's just says go 2.5 times your height off each side.
For what?
3.7.
For 45?
Figure out your mark, so you got your center mark. Whatever the height of your obstruction is. So if it's whatever, multiply that by 2.5. That's how far off your center mark on each side. That's
I wonder why it's only 2.5. Does anybody have that other PDF open? So, which one? So what's 2.5 times 2.25? Oh, I'd rather do it the math way. So if I'm going basically 3 1/4 in either direction, this is where I'm not sure that we're gonna have enough room to do this down. I'll try it anyway. Right, so middle mark first, and then the most important thing for this bend is, I'll go ahead and make this bend first. So I got my mark lined up with the rim notch. I'm gonna bend that at 45 degrees. And then you can see how that ends up is that that center mark ends up right in the middle of that bend. Okay, that's what the rim notch is for. This is the part that people end up screwing this bend up. The outside two bends, just remember that you always have the shoe facing, by shoe I mean this thing, facing towards that middle mark, okay? So I got it on my arrow for the second mark, or for the second bend. So rim notch for the middle, arrow for the outside two bends. I'll line it up. And that one down to 22.5. Do the last bend. Shoe facing towards the middle. Oh, I put a hell of a dog in that. So this is shit, but so that is a 3-point saddle. Kind of open. Yes, it does. So I either overbent these two bends because I'm way out of practice, or I underbent the middle one. Either way. Probably underbent the middle one. I'm gonna put that rim notch back. My center mark. Bend it just a little bit more to fix that. It's more better. So it's a little bit more flat. It's still a little underbent. Better. There it is. Your that. And more. We just barely had enough room to bend. Do you see what I mean about not having enough room? If that's too tight, we would have had to do that on different angles. But the key thing to remember for that is what marks to use, which direction to have the shoe facing when you bend this. 10-4. Right. The other day, somebody asked about 4-point saddles. These are actually pretty easy because all it is 2 offsets back to back, right? Offsets are easy enough. Why am I not getting? I don't have a 4-point saddle one up there. All right, well, we'll just use the same one. Set. I'm gonna draw that a little bit bigger. Um, I'm gonna make this thing just a little bit taller. So let's make this an ivy. I did the other day. Okay, so you have this flat obstruction here. And this will be the center of it. Couple things that we need to know are how wide is this thing? And then what angles are we going to use? Picking the angle, like normally you'd say 30 degrees because that's really easy, right? It's easy to remember the multipliers too. So whatever the height is, you just multiply it times 2, and that's where your marks are going to be. But here we don't have a whole lot of room, do we? So you got to think that, okay, 30-degree angle looks something like that. Probably have enough room, but if we don't, we might have to use a 45. It's a little steeper, right? Something like that. And we're going to go over the top and back down. Follow me? So could we figure out if we have enough room there before we even start, instead of just guessing somehow? Well, first thing we need to do is measure how wide across that beam is. So I'm going to say it's less than 4, but we'll call it 4 inches. And then we're going to do something like that. So if this is 2 inches, and then I know that the distance from the edge of that thing to the box is 14.5. Here to here is 14.5. Here to here is 12.5. And if I'm going to bend this thing on a 45 or a 30, we need to know what this is going to be, right? We need to know how much room this piece of the triangle is going to take up. So with the 30, it's going to be easy. With the 45, you still do it. If it was a tight enough squeeze that you had to figure out which angle you're going to do, say if you're running a rigid pipe, or you're running out of degrees in your bends between pipe runs, we can use the trig to figure that out. So the obstruction height. All this 4 inches. So let's find X for each of those. I got 8 for the 30. 8 inches. Or this is going to be 8 inches. I'm not using sign here, right? Oh, opposite over adjacent. I was thinking it could be the button. Sorry. Okay. .9. So 7 inches as opposed to 4. Makes sense with the 45, 45, 90. Okay. So we want this to be probably 2 inches. This is gonna be 2 inches. So whether we do this on 45, we're gonna take up 4 inches worth of space. So that's 8 total, which is less than 12 and a half. We do it on 30s, 2 plus 2 plus 7 is 11. So we still have enough room. So we have a choice. Which one do we want to do it on?
When it comes down to it too, wouldn't you want to base it off the vendor that you're using? Because I know some of them you don't always have enough room to get those angles super close together, right?
Yeah, I mean, like on that last one, the 3-point saddle, I need a certain amount of room to get the hook in there for that second mark. We just barely made it.
Right.
This one, that's kind of why I made that thing taller instead of just using the triangle, because I want to make sure we have enough room. But in this case, we've got enough room for each of them. Because 2 inches from each end gives you plenty of room to work with to get to your arrow mark, right? So if you had a choice, 30s or 45s, what would you do? 45. 30. 30s. Some people like the look of a 45 better, a little tighter up against the 30s. One, because it's easier. Two, because it makes it easier to pull wire. Less degrees of bend. And less material. And need less. I'm glad you're thinking that way. Just don't overthink that. Because so many people get wrapped up in little bitty, like, all right, this is just me being on the soapbox. Have you ever been on a wire pulling crew or pulled a bunch of wire and people are like trying to get it down to the nitty gritty to save an inch of copper? How much labor does that cost you if you got 5 guys on a wire pulling crew to sit there and say, I'll just pull just a little bit more. All right, pull a little bit back. You know, we don't want to waste any pull. So all that time, take 2 minutes times 5 people. It's 10 minutes, so a sixth of an hour's worth of pay. And a lot of you guys are going to be making $30 plus insurance and all that. I mean, your total package is going to be in the 50s probably. So did you really save that much money by, okay, so that's just me being on a soapbox. I don't like arguing with people about, oh, we're going to save money. Well, labor costs a lot. So I'm glad you're thinking that way, but to save maybe a penny's worth of scrap pipe. So thank you for bringing that up.
Anytime. You're like, we're waiting for it all day.
All right, 30s. So same thing here. I'm not going to worry about shrink or anything. I'm just going to bend the saddle right in the middle and cut the ends off to where I need them. So I got a mark in the middle. Now what? I need to have 4 marks. Yes, that's the width of the beam. So I put a mark here. I guess I need 5
Oh,
marks.
you put a center mark, okay, so
Yeah.
go
So I'm going to go.
an inch one way and an inch the other way.
No,
2
two,
inches.
you were right the first time.
Oh.
2 inches that way, 2 inches that way. Those are going to be my starting marks. Now what? We're bending it on 30, so how far apart are my marks? 8 inches. 8 inches. Everybody understand that? I'll transpose, goes, pose, pose. There's some pose in this house. All right. Shoe facing the right way, that's where everybody screws up. The shoe always faces towards the middle mark. And that's just two offsets back to back. I'll show you how to do that, so I'm not going to take a whole lot of time to explain what I'm doing. But I got 4 marks. So I'm going to bend 2 offsets. Which mark on the bender? Arrow. And then go on to 30, right? I will, don't worry. There's one offset. On for the next one, we just flip it around. Face towards the middle. And then another offset. That's really quiet.
Zach, do you ever have to like compensate for thermal expansion on like a really big project, let's say for a bridge or something? Or you got to worry about it heating up and expanding or some crap?
It's a really good question, but engineers will take care of that.
All right.
So yes, if you do, have you ever looked at conduit running across the bridge while you're driving through? Look at the Shade Loman Bridge. Anybody go across the Shade Loman Bridge ever? Bartonville to Creve Coeur. So we did when I was still working there, all the conduit across that bridge. It was fun. I mean, working over the side of the bridge. All rigid conduit, but like you're talking about, at the expansion joint, so bridges expand and contract, we had to use seal tight, non-metallic seal tight between, so you'd run conduit and you have a piece of PVC in between there. And then back to grounding and bonding, we had the jumper. Yeah, so that as the bridge expands and contracts, that seal tight will move with the bridge.
So you just put extra ink in that steel pipe so it wouldn't stretch forward, stretch it so that it would.
Not so much kink, you just kind of put a little routine in it.
Okay.
So you're gonna move a
Yeah,
couple inches, so.
just a couple. You good?
If you need to know what a couple inches looks like, I'll show you after. All right, that's enough. 4.7. Looks like I underbent that one maybe a little bit, just fix a little bit. That's what it ends up looking like. Oh, that's hella tall. And I overbent some shit. Or underbent.
No, it's just so somebody needs to put something behind it. They got a little bit of a ledge.
Right. Yep, you're right. Good excuse.
Underbend already.
Yeah, stop it.
When you take the time to fix it for you, or are you all happy?
Send it,
Are we happy?
Are you like really happy?
send it, like. Meter and then grow the power right to it.
There are one.
We didn't get 1 cubic meter on power.
That's my line of
Well,
thought, all right?
For cheaper. Money that you do in labor, dishes, and all that. Great.
It's also, I mean, that's-
You be getting so many more daddies. Just for your money. Okay.
I don't have the, I'm trying to do, my year with, well,
I'm not the
Maybe.
certified. I just.
We can
assist in that making that decision. Wait until they get drunk and does it.
No, maybe I just watched some of those things.
You know, Jay, the process of it. I'm like, deducing which one's the best. Well, this one's only had two. And half of a daddy review. And one sister will have half a daddy review.
All right, so here's shrink is the last thing then that we need to talk about.
Kind of like what happened on cold days then.
Mm-hmm.
Or you jump in the pool.
Mm-hmm. So what happens when a lot of inches become a couple of inches?
Or a couple inches. Swimming with the pool guys.
All right.
Are there growers instead of showers?
Now, this is the idea behind shrink, right? So if I had this straight piece of pipe and put a 3-point saddle in there, that center line is going to move. The formula for that is there's a shrink constant of an angle, which is on your sheet, times the number of offsets times the obstruction height. So what is the shrink? What is the shrink constant for a 45-degree bend? 0.41. That means for every inch of height of the obstruction, you take 0.41, that's how much that point is going to move after you bend it. So the bigger the bend, the bigger the offset, the taller the height of the obstruction, the more that center mark is going to move. In this case, it's only one offset. So this point has moved the same amount as point A. But if you had a 4-point saddle or a 3-point saddle, this is the same obstruction height, isn't it? 5? Yep, same height. So we went up 5 inches for one offset, but then we offset it back down in the 3-point saddle. So 3-point saddle or 4-point saddle, the end of the pipe is going to move twice that amount, right? So point A, the shrink is going to be 0.41 times 1 times 5 because it's only one offset at this point. Point B, so the end of the pipe is going to move double that. So what I'm saying is where point A was down here, moved 2 inches. Point B, the end of the pipe from here is moved a little over 4 inches. Make sense? So that's shrink. And that becomes really important if you're running rigid or something that you have to have threaded before you go and bend it. I think that's it. So remember those formulas. You can't use the PowerPoint on your quiz if you have it printed out.
I'm trying to dig out the too many pages over
Right. But if I had to, could I figure this out with trig without knowing that formula, without knowing what the shrink constant is? Yeah. All shrink is a relationship. It's a ratio from the height of the obstruction. So I don't care what this angle is. If this is the height, it's a ratio of that to this distance minus this distance. Okay, so if you thought about this as being on a hinge right here, and I took that and went down like this, and that length was this. If you took A minus B, it's a ratio of the height minus the difference in those two. So for a certain degree angle, that ratio is going to stay the same for all of them. That's where they get the shrink constant for example, don't look at your shrink constant for 30s yet. Don't look at it. Let's pick, somebody pick a number between 5 and 10. 7. We got a 7-inch obstruction. Let's figure out what the other sides are. Figure out what H and A are.
That is 216 is 14, 216 is
217. Why?
It always puts it on the wrong term. And that's why the keeps
12, 12.12. And that. Okay, so what is 14 minus 12.12 is 1.88. So what is 7 divided by 1.88 divided by 7? I don't remember. What's the shrink constant for 30? So what's 1.88 divided by 7? So it's 1.88. The difference of those two divided by the height. Divided by 7 is 0.27. So that means the difference between those two, if this was a 30 and this was 50 degrees or 50 inches, the difference between H and A would be 0.27 times 50. That's where they get the shrink constant. Make sense? So if you forget that formula and you're really good at trig, you can figure this shit out without all the cheat sheet. But you will have the cheat sheet with you, the one sheet that I printed off for you that has the trig and then the supports, the code for the number of supports. You can use your Uglies book, it's not PowerPoint. So Friday we'll do no lecture, we'll take the quiz on Monday. Sound good? Okay. I'm going to put this tripod vise back into back by the conduit in the back if anybody wants to get started on their labs. Conduit labs, otherwise let me know if you need a fault. How many faults